You were never a father to me, Earl. You were just the old man who kept hanging around after Mom moved on. My son said that at my own birthday dinner, in the private room of a country club I had been told I could never belong to. He stood at the head of the table with a glass of bourbon in his hand, his cheeks red, his new watch flashing under the chandelier, and he looked at me like I was something that had crawled in from the rain. "Look at you," he said, loud enough for the servers to hear. 68 years old, still wearing work boots to a place like this. Still driving that dented pickup. Still acting like fixing busted refrigerators and changing oil made you some kind of hero. Then he turned toward the man sitting beside my ex-wife and smiled. "Martin taught me how to be a winner. Martin understands business. Martin understands image. Honestly, I wish he had raised me instead of you." The room went quiet in a way I will never forget. My daughter-in-law stared down at her plate, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. My ex-wife, Linda, the woman I had stayed married to for 34 years, lifted her wine glass and pretended she had not heard a thing. And Martin Bell, the man she married 8 months after our divorce, leaned back in his chair with that clean white smile of his and gave me a little nod like a judge confirming a sentence. I looked at my son, Clay, 42 years old, expensive suit, perfect haircut, restaurant owner, local business magazine cover boy. The same boy I once carried asleep from my old truck because he had stayed up too late counting fireflies by the river. And in that moment, I did not see a villain. I saw a boy who had been fed a lie so long he had mistaken it for his own reflection. He truly believed I was small. He truly believed Martin had made him. He truly believed the smokehouse restaurant with his name on the sign, the downtown building with exposed brick and brass lights, the catering van, the commercial smokers, the supplier credit, the local TV spots. All of it had come from his charm and Martin's genius. He had no idea that almost every board under his feet had my fingerprints in the grain, and he had forgotten the most dangerous thing about an old man who has spent his whole life fixing broken machines. We know exactly which bolt to loosen first. My name is Earl Whitaker. I'm 68 years old, born and raised outside Chattanooga, Tennessee, and for most of my life I ran Whitaker Repair and Supply, a little shop on Route 41 where farmers brought busted pumps. Restaurant owners brought burned-out motors, and half the county brought things they thought were dead until I got my hands on them. I never dressed fancy. I never learned how to talk in circles. I did not golf, did not join clubs, did not drink bourbon with men who measured each other by the shine on their shoes. I built my life with socket wrenches, grease under my nails, and promises I kept. That was enough for me. It was never enough for Linda. By the time our son Clay was in high school, Linda had started saying I lacked vision. That was her favorite word, vision. She said I was too content, too practical, too willing to stay in one place. She wanted dinners with linen napkins and neighbors who owned boats. I wanted our boy to understand the difference between a dollar earned and a dollar borrowed. I tried with Clay. God knows I tried. When he was 16, I brought him to the shop for the summer and told him he could sweep floors, answer phones, and learn how to rebuild a compressor. He lasted 3 days before Linda showed up in her pearl earrings and told me I was humiliating him. "He's not one of your shop boys, Earl," she said. "He's meant for more." When he was 21 and wanted a new truck, I offered to match whatever money he saved. Martin, who had just started mentoring Linda through some real estate club, told him men with ambition didn't wait, they leveraged. Clay leased a truck he could not afford, and I quietly paid 2 missed payments so it would not ruin his credit before he had even started life. When Clay was 29 and said he wanted to open a barbecue restaurant using my father's sauce recipe, I told him I would help him build it, but only if he spent 1 year learning food costs, payroll, sanitation, repairs, and lease terms. He rolled his eyes and said, "Dad, nobody cares how the pipes work if the brand is strong." That sentence should have warned me, but love makes a man hard of hearing, so I helped. Not the way he thought. I did not walk into his life with a big check so he could brag that his old man finally believed in him. I knew that would poison him faster than failure ever could. Instead, I put things under him quietly, the way you jack up a sagging house from the crawlspace. Nobody sees the beam, but without it, the floor holds nothing. The old brick firehouse on Harper Street where Clay opened his restaurant. I bought that building years before through Whitaker Properties after the city auctioned it off. Clay thought the landlord loved his concept so much he gave him a sweetheart lease. He never knew I was the landlord. The 3 custom smokers he loved showing off on Instagram, they were leased through a kitchen equipment company that I owned with my old friend, Ray Donnelly. He had negotiated a brilliant deal. He never noticed my signature 3 pages behind the company name. The secret sauce everyone praised? It was my father's recipe, written in pencil on a flour-stained index card I keep in my safe. Clay used it under a licensing agreement his lawyer barely skimmed, because he was too excited about the logo. The supplier account that let him order meat on 30-day terms instead of paying cash, personally guaranteed by me. The first 6 months of payroll when the restaurant was bleeding money, covered by a line of credit secured against land I had inherited from my mother. Even Martin's so-called consulting company, Bell Strategic Growth, had been paid every month out of a marketing budget I funded because Linda begged me to help keep peace in the family. Martin stood at ribbon cuttings and talked about scaling brands. I paid him to stay out of the kitchen and stop confusing my son. That was my mistake. I thought if I kept the roof from falling in, Clay would eventually learn how to build walls. Instead, I built a man who thought the roof was the sky. The birthday dinner had been Linda's idea. She said Clay wanted to celebrate me. I should have known better when she said it would be at Stonebridge Club, a place I had repaired generators for twice but never entered through the front door. I wore a clean navy jacket, pressed shirt, and the same brown work boots I had worn for 20 years because my feet are bad and I am too old to suffer for strangers. Clay noticed them before he noticed me. The room was full of polished wood and framed horse paintings. Linda wore diamonds I had not bought her. Martin wore a cream-colored jacket and spoke to the waiter like the boy owed him rent. Clay's wife, Amber, kept taking pictures of the table before anyone touched the food. At first, I tried. I really did. Clay talked about opening a second location in Nashville. Martin said expansion was about confidence, not caution. Linda said she always knew Clay was destined for a larger life. Amber said the new place needed a members-only tasting room because exclusivity sells. I asked one simple question. Have you looked at your margins since brisket prices went up? Clay stared at me like I had spit in his glass. There it is, he said, laughing. The old repairman counting pennies. I should have let it pass. For decades, I had let things pass. But that night I said, counting pennies keeps doors open when applause stops paying bills. Martin chuckled. Earl, with respect, that's exactly why Clay needed a modern influence. Some men maintain, some men multiply. Clay lifted his glass toward Martin. Amen to that. Something in me tightened, but I stayed quiet. Then the dessert came. A little chocolate cake with a candle in it, though nobody sang. Linda pushed it toward me like she was feeding a courthouse witness. Clay leaned back, looked around the table, and said, You know what's sad? I spent half my life embarrassed by him, and he still thinks he gets to give advice. That was when he stood. That was when he said I had never been a father, that I was just the old man who kept hanging around, that Martin had made him a winner, that he wished Martin had raised him. I could have told him everything right there. I could have opened my phone, shown him deeds, contracts, guarantees, the license for the sauce that had his customers licking their fingers. I could have watched his face collapse in front of that table, but there are moments when a man realizes words are too small for the truth. So I stood up, my knees cracked, my hands were steady. I looked at Linda first. Her eyes slid away. I looked at Martin. His smile stayed put, but his fingers tightened around his glass. Then I looked at Clay, my only child, and for 1 second I wanted to beg him to remember who packed his lunches, who sat beside his hospital bed when he had pneumonia, who fixed his bike chain, who taught him to hold a fishing rod, who clapped the loudest when he crossed a stage in a cap and gown. But begging a grown man to love you is a terrible way to spend your last years. I took the candle from the cake, pinched out the flame with my fingers, set it on the table, and walked out. Nobody followed me. That told me everything. I drove home slowly, not because I was calm, but because if I drove the way I felt, I might not have made it home at all. My old farmhouse sits 20 minutes outside town, past a feed store, 2 churches, and a cemetery where my parents are buried. The porch light was on. The dogwood tree my mother planted still leaned toward the kitchen window. Inside, the house was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum. I went to the mudroom, took off my jacket, and stood there looking at my boots. Clay had mocked them. Those boots had stood in floodwater, fixing a church boiler on Christmas Eve. They had climbed under school buses, walked hospital corridors, and carried me through the kind of days men like Martin hire people to handle. I did not feel ashamed of them. I felt ashamed of what I had allowed. In my office, above the roll-top desk, hangs a photograph of Clay at 7 years old. He is sitting on the counter of my shop, holding a wrench too big for his hand, grinning like I had given him Excalibur. That boy used to think I could fix anything. I sat beneath that photograph for a long time. Then I opened the safe. There was no secret computer program, no dramatic red button. Real life does not work like that. Real life is paper. Signatures, dates, clauses written in plain language that arrogant people never read. I pulled out 4 folders: the building lease, the equipment agreements, the sauce license, the personal guarantees. Then I called Ray Donnelly. Ray is 71, a retired banker with hearing aids, bad knees, and the sharpest mind for contracts I have ever seen. He answered on the 3rd ring and said, "Earl, if you're calling this late, somebody finally crossed the line." "Yes," I said. Clay did. Ray was quiet. Then he said, "How far?" "All the way." The next morning, I met Ray and my attorney, Marisol Crane, at her office above the courthouse. Marisol had represented me for 23 years. She knew where every piece of my life was filed because she had helped me build the walls around it after Linda left. She did not ask if I was angry. She asked if I was certain. That is why I trust her. I told them what happened at Stonebridge. I repeated my son's words without letting my voice shake. Martin made him a winner. He wished Martin had raised him. I was just the old man hanging around. Ray took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Marisol wrote one sentence on a yellow legal pad: "End voluntary support. Not destroy Clay, not punish Clay, not revenge. End voluntary support." That distinction mattered to me. I did not want to burn my son's life to the ground. I wanted to stop being the hidden firewood. Marisol laid out what could be done legally and cleanly. First, I would withdraw my personal guarantee on future supplier orders. That would not cancel what had already shipped, but starting immediately, Clay's restaurant would have to pay cash on delivery like every other business without credit. Second, Ray's equipment company would notify Clay that the promotional lease rate on the smokers and refrigeration units had ended. He could keep them if he paid the real commercial rate within 7 days. If not, the equipment would be collected. Third, Whitaker Properties would give formal notice that the below-market lease on the firehouse would not be renewed under its special family terms. He had 30 days to sign a standard lease at market rent or vacate. Fourth and hardest, I would suspend the sauce license until Clay met the conditions in the agreement: proper attribution to the Whitaker family recipe, no transfer to additional locations without approval, and no use of the brand in partnership with outside consultants who had not been disclosed. Martin had been negotiating Nashville expansion using my family recipe behind my back. That was the part Clay did not know I knew. Marisol slid the papers toward me. "This will not collapse him overnight," she said, "but it will make him stand without you." "That's all I want," I said. Ray studied me. "And Martin?" I looked down at my hands. They were old hands, scarred hands, hands that had repaired things other people had given up on. Martin can win with his own money now. So we began. Not like an explosion, like turning off lights in rooms where nobody should have been living for free. The first notice went out Monday morning. Clay was in the restaurant kitchen filming a video when his butcher called. I heard the recording later, because Clay left me a voicemail screaming through most of it. The butcher, a patient man named Hector, told Clay the account terms had changed. No more 30 days. No more Earl's guarantee. Payment due before delivery. Clay laughed at first. He thought it was a clerical mistake. Hector said, "No mistake. Your father removed his guarantee." That was the first time my name entered the room without me. Clay tried 3 cards. One was declined. One did not have enough available credit. The third went through for a partial order. Not enough brisket to get through the weekend. Customers expecting platters and catering trays would be getting apologies. A small thing, maybe. But pride bleeds from small cuts first. On Tuesday, Ray's equipment company sent its notice. The smokers, Clay called his babies, were not owned by him. They never had been. They were leased at a symbolic rate because I had arranged it. That rate was now over. The real payment was due in 7 days. Clay called Ray and tried to charm him. Ray let him talk for 5 minutes. Then he said, "Son, charm doesn't satisfy an invoice. By Wednesday, Martin was calling Clay every hour. The Nashville investors had heard the Whitaker sauce license was suspended pending review. Without that recipe, the expansion was just another barbecue joint with Edison bulbs in debt. Martin's consulting fee depended on the Nashville deal closing. Linda's lake condo depended on Martin's consulting fee. The luxury SUV she drove depended on money Martin had not actually earned yet. It amazed me, even then, how many grown adults had built their lives on my silence. Thursday brought the letter from Marisol. It was delivered by courier to the restaurant during lunch rush. Clay signed for it himself, probably thinking it was another opportunity to be important. Inside was a formal suspension of the recipe and brand license. He could sell food. I was not stopping him from working. But he could not call it Whitaker Smokehouse, could not bottle Whitaker sauce, could not advertise a second location using my family name, and could not continue negotiations with Martin's undisclosed investor group while in violation of the agreement. That afternoon, the sign company called to ask why a lawyer had stopped production on the Nashville storefront. By Friday morning, Clay was no longer calling me a loser. He was just calling. I did not answer. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because for the first time in his adult life, he needed to sit with a problem long enough to hear what it was trying to teach him. Saturday evening, he came to my house, not in his polished SUV. That had been taken by Amber after a fight, according to Linda's angry texts. Clay arrived in a borrowed pickup from one of his line cooks, the passenger door a different color than the rest. He knocked hard enough to rattle the glass. I let him knock twice. Then I opened the door. He looked terrible. Not poor, not broken, just unpolished. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. His hair, usually combed like a magazine photo, stuck up on one side. "You did this," he said. I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked into the house he used to run through barefoot, the house he had called depressing, outdated, small. He looked around like he was seeing it after a storm had cleared. Same oak table. Same family photographs. Same smell of coffee and lemon oil. Nothing in that house had ever pretended to be more than it was. We went into my office. He did not sit until I told him to. That told me something had changed. He started with anger, because anger is easier than fear. He said I had humiliated him. I had damaged his business. I had made him look weak in front of employees, suppliers, investors, his wife Martin. I listened. Then I asked, "Are you finished?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. I pulled out the first folder and placed it on the desk between us. "This is the lease for your building," he frowned. "My building?" "No," I said. "The building you rent from me at 1/3 market rate." I watched him read enough to understand. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I placed the second folder down. "These are the equipment agreements. The smokers, refrigerators, prep tables, catering warmers. You've been paying a courtesy rate because Ray and I believed you were still learning. That was business," he whispered. "That was mercy, wearing a business suit." The third folder, supplier guarantee. Without my signature, Hector would never have extended those terms to a new restaurant with no reserve cash. Clay stared at the papers as if they had been written in another language. Then I laid down the old index card in a plastic sleeve, my father's handwriting, vinegar, brown sugar, pepper, mustard, 3 ingredients I will not say aloud because some things still belong to the dead. "This," I said, "is the recipe you built your brand on. Your grandfather made it for church picnics when people still paid him in tomatoes and fence repair. It was never Martin's to package. It was never yours to sell to Nashville investors without asking." Clay's face changed then, not anger, shame. But I was not done. I opened the last folder and turned it toward him. "Bell Strategic Growth," I said. His eyes moved across the page. "Monthly consulting payments. Marketing reimbursements, expansion fees, all routed through budgets I had funded or guaranteed in the beginning to keep Linda from turning every holiday into a war." "Martin told me he brought in those investors," Clay said. "I'm sure he did. He said he helped structure the whole thing. He structured a way to get paid from a table he didn't build." Clay looked up slowly. I said, "The man you called a winner has been eating off my plate for years. Your mother knew enough not to ask questions. You knew enough not to read papers. And I knew enough to be ashamed of myself for letting it continue. That last part surprised him. Good. A man listens differently when you admit your own sin first. I failed you, Clay, I said. His eyes flickered. I don't mean I failed by driving an old truck or wearing work boots. I failed because I softened every hard lesson before it reached you. I paid what you should have paid. I fixed what you should have fixed. I let you believe confidence was the same as competence. I called it love because love sounded better than fear. He stared at the desk. I was afraid you'd struggle. I was afraid you'd resent me. I was afraid your mother would turn you against me completely if I pushed too hard. So I kept helping in ways you couldn't see. And all I did was make it easier for you to worship the loudest man in the room. Clay's voice came out small. So what now? That was the first honest question he had asked me in years. I leaned back. Now you run a real business, or you close an imaginary one. He swallowed. You can keep the building if you pay market rent. You can keep the equipment if you pay the real lease. You can keep buying meat if you pay like everybody else. You can earn the right to use the Whitaker name again by removing Martin from any agreement tied to it, crediting your grandfather, and showing me books that make sense. Not projections. Books. His hands were shaking. And if I can't, then you start smaller. He looked wounded by the idea, which told me he needed it. Food truck. Catering out of a rented kitchen. Work under someone else for 6 months. Sell the watch. Sell the image. Keep the skill, if there's skill under there. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Outside, a truck passed on the road, its tires humming against the asphalt. Somewhere in the house, the old wall clock ticked with the steady patience of things that do not care who is embarrassed. Then Clay said, Mom told me you never wanted more. I nodded. Your mother told herself that first. Made it easier to leave. Martin said you were jealous of men who could take risks. I took risks every day, I said. I just took them for people I loved, not people I wanted to impress. His eyes filled, but no tears fell. I called you nothing, he said. Yes, you did. I said he was my father. Yes. He rubbed both hands over his face like he wanted to wipe the week away. I don't know how to fix that. For the first time, all night, my voice almost broke. You don't fix it with one apology. He nodded, slowly. You fix it by becoming the kind of man who never says it again. Clay left after midnight. I did not hug him. He did not ask for money. That was the beginning of something, though I did not yet know what. The next month was ugly. Amber left for her sister's house in Atlanta after discovering the second location was dead. Martin vanished from the restaurant the moment there was no fee attached to his advice. Linda called me 17 times in 2 days, each message worse than the last. The first one was tears. The second was blame. By the 5th, she said I was destroying our son out of spite. By the 9th, she said Martin had bills due and I owed him basic decency. By the 13th, she forgot to pretend this was about Clay at all. You have always had money hidden, she snapped. You let me look foolish. I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, but because some people can stand in the ashes of their own choices and still complain about the color of the smoke. I finally answered on the 17th call. Linda started before I said hello. Martin was under pressure. The condo payment was late. The SUV lease was a problem. Her friends were asking questions. Clay was acting cold. Everyone was suffering because I had decided to be cruel. I let her talk until she ran out of breath. Then I said, Linda, I am done financing people who are ashamed of me. Silence. Then she said, after all our years together? No, I said. Because of all our years together. I ended the call and set the phone on the porch table, face down. That small act gave me more peace than I expected. Clay did not save the restaurant as it was. That is the truth. Stories lie when they make consequences look clean. He closed the dining room for 3 weeks, sold the brass fixtures, returned half the leased equipment, moved into the back office, because Amber had taken the apartment. He paid Hector cash for smaller meat orders and cut the menu down to 6 items. He took his own name off the sign and put up a temporary banner that said, Smokehouse Kitchen. No Whitaker. Not yet. I heard from other people that he was there before dawn and still there after midnight. I heard he fired Martin's marketing assistant and hired back Miss Patty, the 62-year-old prep cook he had once said was off-brand. I heard he burned 3 batches of ribs because he had never actually managed the pit himself. Good. Burnt meat teaches faster than applause. 3 months later, Clay came by the shop. I had reopened it 2 days a week, mostly because old men need somewhere to go where people still bring them problems that can be solved. He walked in wearing jeans, plain boots, and a faded restaurant shirt with smoke stains on the sleeves. He carried a cardboard box. Inside were 12 bottles of sauce. New label, small print. Original recipe by Samuel Whitaker, preserved with permission by his son Earl. Clay set the box on the counter. "I'm not asking to use the name," he said. "Not yet. I just wanted you to see that I changed the label." I picked up a bottle and turned it in my hand. For a moment, I could see my father standing by a cinderblock pit, wiping sweat with a red rag, telling me sauce was like character. Too much sugar, and people like it at first, but it burns when heat gets high. I looked at Clay. "You been cooking?" "Yes, sir." "Books balanced?" "Barely." "Martin involved?" "No, sir." "Your mother?" He gave a tired little laugh. "Mad at everybody." That sounded right. I set the bottle down. "I'm still hurt," I said. His face tightened. "I know. I still hear what you said. I do too." That was the first answer that felt like a brick laid straight. He looked around the shop, at the dusty shelves, the bins of bolts, the old counter scarred by 40 years of work. "I used to be proud here," he said. I said nothing. "I forgot that," he whispered. We stood there a long time, two men surrounded by tools, both of us old enough in different ways to know that some repairs cannot be rushed. Then he held out his hand. Not for money, not for rescue, just his hand. I looked at it. I remembered the baby fingers that once wrapped around my thumb, the teenage hand that pushed mine away, the grown man's hand that pointed at me in a country club and called me nothing. Then I shook it. Not forgiveness, not all of it, but a start. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee gone lukewarm and watched the sun drop behind the ridge. The house was quiet. The phone was quiet. The world, for once, was not asking me to hold up someone else's ceiling. I thought about the birthday cake at Stonebridge, the candle I had pinched out, the way my son's words had landed in my chest like a hammer, and I thought about what I had learned too late. Spoiling a child does not always look like buying toys. Sometimes it looks like paying bills in secret. Sometimes it looks like saving them from shame. Sometimes it looks like calling your fear love, because you cannot bear to watch them fall. I loved my son wrong for a long time. Then I loved him enough to stop. So tell me, brothers and sisters, what would you have done in my boots? Comment 1 if you think I was right to pull away every hidden support and make my son stand on his own. Comment 2 if you think I waited too long and should have told him the truth years earlier. Comment 3 if you think the real damage came from all of us adults who taught him image mattered more than character. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Have you ever been looked down on by someone who had no idea how much you were holding together? I'd like to hear it, because quiet people carry more than the world will ever know, and sometimes the day finally comes when setting it down is the only way to save what's left of your life. Love is not proven by how much we carry for someone, but by whether we help them become strong enough to carry themselves. Earl's hardest choice was also his kindest one. He stopped feeding a lie so his son could find the truth. Families can still heal when pride softens, gratitude returns, and one honest step becomes the beginning of home.